All right. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you're at. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We're really excited about this next session, Low Barriers, Deep Engagement for P2P Fundraising Success. It's just one of several different sessions we're doing today. This conference is brought to you by 5 companies that serve the nonprofits and that have come together to share a unique experience and knowledge with the sector. These companies are ACG, Cathexis Partners, HepData, Op3, and Twilio.org. My name is Mark Becker. I'm the founding partner of Cathexis Partners, and I'm happy to be introducing each of the sessions today. During each session, please feel free to submit any questions in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll be answering those along the way or by the end of the call for sure. And we want this to be interactive. We want you to ask questions, and we'll be sure to keep an eye on those as we go. Please note that this session will be recorded and made available online after today's virtual conference. And with that, let me turn it over to Megan.
Thank you, Mark. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Megan Nesbitt, and my co-presenter here is Matt Scott. I'm calling in today from my offices at Twilio, where I'm the Director of Nonprofit Development. I work at Twilio's in our arm that is responsible for social impact. So I work with a lot of different nonprofit organizations that use Twilio to help build out the communications for their organizations. To give you a little bit of background on myself, so I've been in the nonprofit sector for, I've been very fortunate to be in the nonprofit sector since about 2000. I was the person who demonstrated the great skill at the nonprofit that I was working at on how to change the ink cartridge on a printer. So from that point on, I became the accidental techie and was responsible for technology, which has put me on a pretty fun path. I was lucky enough to try to source out an online database in kind of the early 2000s for doing constituent record management, which is how I stumbled upon a little organization, a startup called Salesforce. I was able to join that team for about 5 years and help build out the nonprofit program on how nonprofits were using online systems to connect information about their programs and constituents. In about 2010, I was really fascinated with the emergence of online communities and how people were connecting more online. I thought this had a huge potential for how people could create change in their communities at scale. So I joined another startup at the time called Change.org to really look at how people could work together to use collective action to create change in the world. And most recently, about 1.5 years ago, the whole idea of how this constantly evolving communication landscape and what are the different building blocks people can use to create change. And that's what brought me over to Twilio, where I work on programs to help nonprofits, specifically with the kind of communications layer of how they're communicating with both beneficiaries of their programs, supporters, and more. And one of the people who I've been really lucky to work with is Matt Scott. So Matt, you want to do your intro?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening. Apparently, it's time all around the world. People are tuning in here. My name is Matt Scott. I'm the Deputy Director of Development Operations at Team Rubicon, a disaster relief nonprofit organization based in Los Angeles, California. And I'm also the co-founder of Cosmic, and we are an organization that helps nonprofits raise money and awareness online, primarily by building robust marketing, fundraising, and technology strategies and executing those strategies for our nonprofit clients. And I'm really excited to be joining you today. Similar to Megan, I've worked in the nonprofit space for about a decade, and primarily working with Salesforce and most recently Twilio to communicate with supporters from peer-to-peer fundraisers to donors, and I'm really looking forward to sharing with you some of the strategies and tactics that I've come to adopt and I think have a lot of really tremendous results.
Awesome, great. So Matt, if you want to jump to the next slide. So the purpose of this session, low barriers and deep engagement for peer-to-peer fundraising success. We really want to share best practices and tricks of the trade for activating wildly successful peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns. I hope that all of us walk away with some new ideas and strategies and approaches that you can apply for your next peer-to-peer campaign, maybe even something that you're going to be using for your year-end campaigns this year. The topics that we'll cover really quickly are trends in the nonprofit space, then diving into elements of a successful peer-to-peer campaign, and Matt's going to talk us through two really, really powerful examples, one from Kiteboard for Cancer, and the other, most recently, a Team Rubicon example for the Hurricane Harvey response. And we are going to have a good chunk of time for question and answers with Matt and myself, but I also recognize there are some pretty good experts on the line right now as well. So as we're going through the presentation, if you have comments, suggestions, other ways that you've done things, or questions as well, please do tap them into the GoToWebinar chat window, and we'll be sure to go through those questions towards the end of the session as well. So let's jump in and talk about trends in the nonprofit space. So trends in the nonprofit space, I think these trends that I'm going to speak about really high level are more trends that we're seeing in our lives overall, and then just how we're applying this within the nonprofit space, particularly around peer-to-peer fundraising. So I think number one is just peer-to-peer fundraising, especially for those of us who've been around a few laps around the sun. Peer-to-peer fundraising is not some new concept that just came into being. Organizations that raise funds for charitable purposes have been doing this as long as charities have been around. Even most recently with the kind of things like walkathons, where I certainly recall when I was in middle school signing up because one of my friends who had a family member with a cancer diagnosis, and I remember signing up to do the walkathon to raise money on behalf of her sister. This has been around for a long time. The idea that we have people in our networks who can raise funds for our organizations has been around. It's just the context in which we're applying this strategy has changed significantly. One of the biggest changes is just how connected we are. People have never been connected at the scale and level that they are. That's really just been empowered through technology. I don't know if you all saw, but most recently Facebook is saying that they're currently getting up to about 2 billion monthly users on Facebook. Some of the stats we have over at Twilio, over 4.2 billion people worldwide are using text, SMS. That's just a very, very large group of people that you can reach pretty scalably and that are connected in unique ways they weren't connected before. And an interesting thing about digital connection as well that I just want to point out is the concept that not only are we connected, but we're connected in a way that leans itself very well for participation and persuasion. If you just think about how you currently receive your news or the last news article you read, chances are if you follow trend, it's not because that newspaper was delivered at your front doorstep and you read an article and then maybe mentioned it to somebody at the dining room table. Chances are you read that article based on something you saw on your Facebook feed or your Twitter feed. You clicked on it, you read it, you maybe even commented on it, or you shared and forwarded it to other people. It's connection in a very participatory way, and because we're sharing information through these networks, we also have a lot of persuasion that comes along with the way that we're connecting, sharing information, and acting on that information. And I think that can be really powerful, and I also want to call out that can also certainly lead to big information bubbles. I think a lot of people have spoken about these kind of siloed chambers that we're getting into, where we're surrounded by a lot of people who might think like us. And it can be both a big opportunity and a challenge for nonprofits. How do you break into people's bubbles in a way where you can encourage them to participate and be persuaded to join your efforts? So in the context in which we're operating today, where we've got so many people connected and the ability to participate and persuade each other, and you have both the opportunity and challenge of these bubbles of people and networks around, what are the things that peer-to-peer fundraising disruptors are doing within this atmosphere, within this context, to really stand out from other organizations and to be really successful with their peer-to-peer campaigns? And I think what we'll go through and what Matt will really help you all understand and come up with some really good takeaways is the peer-to-peer fundraising disruptors, they're embracing the unique ways that people are connected today. They're taking the time to reach the right person on the right channel with the right message, and they're employing the right tools to do this in a really efficient manner. So Matt, why don't we turn it back over to you so you can walk us through a couple of hard examples of how you've done this.
Thank you so much, Megan. Yeah, just kicking things right off here with one of my favorite nonprofits, Athletes for Cancer. And what I particularly love about this example of peer-to-peer fundraising through a connected nonprofit is its size. I know some of the attendees here today may not be the size of Team Rubicon, may not have an international brand with tens of thousands of supporters. You may be smaller in size. Athletes for Cancer is a really a small organization with fewer than 10 employees, and each year they have a fundraising event called Kiteboard for Cancer, where people essentially come and it's a fundraise to enter event-based peer-to-peer fundraiser, and they have over 130 participants who participate in this peer-to-peer fundraising event. And some of the core elements that I'm going to go over are the effectiveness of having a time-based campaign, as well as how do you develop a strong theme that ties back to your programmatic mission. And finally, how do you leverage multiple channels like Megan spoke to reach each and every one of your participants in this fundraising event in order to raise a lot more money. So, this event, Kiteboard for Cancer, takes place, like I said, each year. And one of the most effective kind of strategies when you're thinking about communicating with your participants in a fundraiser, whether it's an event or whether it's a digital campaign, is the length of time of this campaign. We've kind of come to find that a 4 to 6 week time-based campaign is a really nice thing to target. And that's because when you start communicating with your participants, with your donors, and with your fundraisers, the 4 to 6 week mark really allows you to have continuous communication across multiple channels without fatigue. And that's a really important element because so many of us are inundated with lots and lots of material and requests from our nonprofits that we support. Having a time-based campaign really eliminates the fatigue that you sometimes experience with lots of communications. The second thing to really kind of think about is the development of a strong theme. So Athletes for Cancer sends young adult cancer survivors to outdoor adventure camps post-treatment. And at the time when we kicked off Kiteboard for Cancer this year, we had a wait list. So these are young adult cancer survivors who are waiting to go to camp. And it cost about $1,500 to send a young adult cancer survivor to an outdoor adventure camp. So we came up with this theme of no wait list. And it created an opportunity for us to have tangible impact for those participating, from setting a fundraising goal at $1,500 to communicating on a regular recurring basis the impact that they're having during the campaign. And most excitingly, from the time that the campaign wrapped up, we've been able to maintain that theme throughout the year, communicating with them, hey, this is the impact that you had. This was an individual who was on the wait list, who you fundraised to get into camp, who is no longer on the wait list. And you can imagine how effective that strategy can be for retaining year-over-year participants as both fundraisers and donors. The final thing that I'll mention with respects to this campaign is, how do you reach your constituents through multiple channels? And you don't have to have all the bells and whistles. You can actually achieve this just by thinking about some of the major channels: email, text, direct mail, phone calls, right? These are all channels to communicate with your constituents. And one of the core things that you want to think about when creating a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign is how can I leverage these channels to have strong narrative that turns people who are passionate about my cause into professional fundraisers. Most of the people attending this webinar are probably professional fundraisers. So you know that you have to ask for money in order for money to be given. But the people who are participating in your fundraising event, they may not share that same knowledge that you have of the industry. So when you think about like how do you reach these constituents, how do you help make them successful, we like to think about it as sending out coaching emails, for example, for fundraisers or SMS, and again, always kind of tying back to that theme.
Hey Matt, can I just ask you a quick question on this? I love this example, and particularly I love the concrete nature of the ask itself. It's so tangible, right? The idea of 107 people on a wait list to be able to go to these camps, and kind of as a momentum builder, being able to show this much money was raised. Now, you know, this many people are off the list and in the camp. I love how tangible that is. Could you just talk through a little bit how you came up with that ask?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where I was talking about, you know, a strong theme that ties back to the mission. In this case, you know, we kind of wanted to think about what motivates somebody to give, what motivates somebody to participate in this fundraiser. And it's really a fun, creative process. You can sit down and you can think about it programmatically. What kind of outcome are you looking for? Everybody loves to fundraise for unrestricted funding, right? Because obviously unrestricted funds are hard to come by. And I think there are clever ways where you can still leverage the story and the narrative that comes from your programs in order to fundraise unrestricted funding. And so when we came up with this theme, we really kind of thought about what is it that makes Athletes for Cancer unique, and how can we leverage that story to help drive and motivate fundraising. In particular, because with peer-to-peer fundraising, people aren't giving to your organization. They're giving to their friend who's asking for support. So we have to educate the potential donors, which gets us one step closer to really connecting that donor, not to the fundraiser, but to the organization. So when we think about a strong theme, we want to think about how does it tie programmatically to what it is the organization's doing, and what kind of powerful narrative can we write around that theme that can begin to transition new donors who are really just giving to their friend to instead giving to the organization as a whole. Hope that answered that question.
Yes, thank you.
Cool, yeah. So the other, you know, example that I'm going to talk through today is, you know, for some of the larger organizations on this call, on this webinar. And I'm really excited to talk about Team Rubicon. Team Rubicon is a nonprofit organization, of course, that deploys military veterans to respond to natural disasters. And one of the really exciting things about Team Rubicon is the explosive growth. The organization was founded in 2010 following the earthquake in Haiti, and you can see that to date, Team Rubicon has deployed on over 190 disaster relief operations. And in fact, these numbers are now outdated. It's over 200. And you know, when I first started working with Team Rubicon, we had about $250,000 in annual revenue, and we're up to around 15 million now, and including most recently with Hurricane Harvey, where we raised a little over $7 million. So I'm going to talk through, you know, how do you leverage technology to scale personalized engagement, and how does that influence a fundraising event like a disaster. So for the purposes of this part of the conversation, I'm going to be speaking mainly to the peer-to-peer fundraising element of the Hurricane Harvey relief efforts. And but there were a lot of components, right? It's about leveraging a number of your supporters, from corporate partners to major donors, and how do you kind of look to your whole database to have an overall fundraising strategy and plan. But specifically, these tactics are going to be talking about the peer-to-peer fundraising element, which raised about $1.8 million in about 7 days. So when we're first launching, you know, a fundraising event or a peer-to-peer campaign, thinking, whether it's a pre-planned time-based campaign like the one example that I gave earlier, or if it's in response to a major event like a natural disaster, you want to really think about leveraging your existing channels, in this case the blog, to build up momentum as you begin to make that initial ask for participation. And what I really like about this concept is you can take something like a blog, which takes time and energy to put together, and you can push it out across multiple channels, SMS, email, and social media, and you can adjust it slightly based on that channel. Example, when we sent it out via SMS, was we used a very small amount of the blog to tease somebody to draw them in, where with social media we used more powerful visuals to draw in the people. And then with email, we were able to form, to include a longer form version of that. So it's all about kind of building excitement and leveraging your content across multiple channels to kind of launch the campaign. The other thing that that does is it really sets you up to activate your supporters. And everybody knows, hey, let's look back on our previous peer-to-peer fundraisers, right? But I want to challenge people to think beyond the obvious audiences and segment your call to actions to fundraise based on those audiences. So in this case, we have two examples. One, Team Rubicon has a recurring birthday campaign that it has, and we were able to quickly and easily adjust the Pledge Your Birthday campaign to specifically talk about dedicating your birthday to Hurricane Harvey. You can see how that timely message really resonates with people more so than just a passive ask to leverage your birthday. And the other example here is programmatically, there was a group of women who were impacted by Hurricane Sandy, and those people were affected by Team Rubicon. Team Rubicon served them. They helped muck out their house, they helped clear debris from their land, they helped with volunteer and logistical management during Hurricane Sandy in the Rockaways. And we thought, oh, that's interesting, right? Like that's a different audience. So we asked the women of Rockaway to come together and to create a fundraising campaign. And they were able to share their story about how Team Rubicon helped them and how they are now paying it forward with the people who are affected by Hurricane Harvey. So it's just really interesting to think beyond the immediate and obvious segments when you think about who you're going to ask to fundraise. There are a few tactics, to converting somebody from being passionate about your cause into a professional fundraiser. And I think, one of the things that you can do in preparation to a campaign is to develop a fundraising guide. And there are some core, kind of fundamentals to what that guide should include. First and foremost, you want to educate people who are fundraising on your behalf. You want to help break it down for them. Where exactly is the money going? What can that dollar amount provide? Then you want to help provide them with the tools and resources, primarily with sample social media posts, sample emails, sample SMS messages, to broadcast that message to their audience, to their potential supporters. And finally, you want to make it personal. So looking back at that example about the birthday or the Rockaways that I had, you really kind of want to personalize your experience for your individual supporters. Thinking just like in traditional fundraising, 80% of your time is going to be spent on 20% of your prospects. In this case, you think, who's going to be most impactful at sharing that story? Well, it's the women of the Rockaways. So we're going to actually invest more of our time into that audience, making it personal, than we will, say, in the broader broadcast. The other thing, that's really important here is thinking about marketing channels, right? So again, I spoke a little bit earlier about the importance of a time-based campaign because it doesn't risk supporter fatigue. And I'm really kind of quite proud of the personalized engagement experience that we were able to deploy in response to Hurricane Harvey. We asked people flat out, look, how frequently would you like to be contacted? We were having some incredible stories come out of Houston, Texas, for example. Do you want those stories to be delivered to you daily, weekly? Do you want it, after we wrap up our response? Would you prefer text or email? Or would you prefer us to send you a physical printed report? What is the type of content that's most meaningful to you? Asking these questions drove up the open, more importantly, the read rate. So what you're looking at up here at the top is, for those people who opted in as email as their preferred channel, we saw that 87% of those people actually read the email that we sent out. So by identifying on an individual basis and putting that information inside of your donor management system, you're able to customize that experience for people, essentially meeting them on their preferred channel with their preferred content. And that's really going to help drive home the results, reduce fatigue, and increase their total lifetime value to your organization. So once you collect this information, now you have the opportunity to share it, to report back impact, right? Impact reporting, we kind of think about it in two major segments. First is data, and data is really important. It helps quantify on a broad scale what the impact of a supporter's contribution, whether it's a fundraiser or a donor. And the second is really the narrative that supports the data, right? It's the individual story that puts a face to a number. And in this case, these are just two of the channels that we use. We send handwritten thank you cards to all 17,450 donors who gave. We sent a personalized handwritten thank you card. And then also to, leveraging the power of Twilio, we were able to send out impact reports. So again, we were able to leverage that blog and demonstrate and drive home impact for our supporters.
Hey Matt, a quick question for you. As I look at this text message that you sent out, at Twilio, a lot of nonprofits come to Twilio because they want to embed a new communication into their workflow, right? And that's primarily the number one channel people are currently looking at is SMS. But the reason they like SMS is because it's really timely. 98% of people open an SMS message. That usually happens within about 3 minutes. So for organizations that use Twilio involved in their fundraising campaigns, the message that I most commonly see organizations use is actually a solicitation appeal, because they know it's going to get opened, they know it's going to get read. It's really interesting to me that you chose to use this, very time-sensitive channel to send a thank you. And also the handwritten card. I think thank yous on a handwritten postcard, that's great. People can just read it right out of the mailbox, not even opening the letter. I'm just curious what your thinking was to come up with, how did you choose to use those channels for delivering that impact message?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I mean, as probably you saw from the beginning of this presentation, the photo of me, I am a millennial, so I am on my mobile device all the time. That being said, I can't overstate the power of a handwritten card, right? So I love the dichotomy here. I love that one of these channels is so digital, and it's so, really, let's be honest, the smartphone was invented in the last 7 years, right? The other is so forgotten. And by combining these two, what you're showing a supporter is, we are incredibly grateful for your support, whether it's participation as a fundraiser or a donor. We are incredibly grateful for that, and we are taking the time to not only say thank you, but to also drive home impact and to share with you what the effect of your contribution is. So I think, why do we send out messages of gratitude via SMS? We also send out solicitations, certainly, for support, whether it's to get your go bag and get ready to get dirty because you're going to volunteer on this operation and help the people in Houston, whether it's a call to action to fundraise or a call to action to donate. Those are all important, but again, I think we're building long-term relationships. I'm incredibly proud that we had over 7,000 new donors come in a 48-hour period, but I'll tell you, I'm more proud that we had over 10,000 repeat donors in a week-long period, and it's because from the beginning, we've always thought about how do we treat people like people? How do we say thank you in a truly genuine way? And something I didn't include here was in the early days, so that means Hurricane Sandy, it feels like a lifetime ago, but when we were designing a system for personalized engagement, that system used to be myself and a couple of other people with a Bud Light sitting around a table, handwriting personal thank you cards to thousands of people. And two things there. One, yes, we were so cheap that we could only afford Bud Light. And as a Portland person, I think I need to call attention to that in case there's any other PDX people on this call. But the second thing is, we weren't afraid to lean forward and to lean into the fact that we needed to say thank you. And I'll never forget the time we received a call that was like, hey, I really appreciated the thank you note on Wednesday, on Saturday, and on Tuesday. And so what that means is we sent the same card to the same person 3 times. By we, I mean it was me, so there's no one else to blame. But what that highlighted was a need for a genuine system to scale personalized engagement. And but I'll tell you what, we have an incredibly high attrition rate, and that's because we say thank you in a really real way. So that's a long roundabout way of answering your question as to why we not only use SMS for ask, but also for expressions of sincere gratitude.
Yeah, I love that for long-term sustainability. It makes a ton of sense. And before you move on to your next slide, we do have some questions coming in on the webinar panel. I apologize that I'm only voicing my questions, but we are going to get to your questions towards the end of the session. So we'll keep going through these, and then we'll do a roundup of questions at the end. So please do keep popping your questions in the chat window.
Good reminder too. I'll stay on point so that we can make sure to get to them, because I know questions are often more valuable than me speaking out into the world, or always more. So this is another channel that I want to draw attention toward, and talking about Megan talked about that kind of donor retention, but also we like to think about how can we leverage channels to again express gratitude, to begin to introduce people, because with peer-to-peer fundraising, as I've already mentioned, so many people are supporting an individual. They're not supporting Team Rubicon, they're supporting Joe, right? So we use a new donor welcome series sent through email in order to not only quantify that impact and begin to introduce people to the organization Team Rubicon as opposed to Joe. Excuse me. We also use it, though, to introduce ways for them to increase their engagement with Team Rubicon. So this is just one of many that go out through that new donor welcome series. But this one here highlights the monthly recurring revenue, or the support squad. And from this new donor welcome series, we added $7,300 in new recurring revenue across 203 new monthly donors in that 14-day period during Hurricane Harvey's fundraising push. So I think it highlights the opportunity. Again, if you're sincere with your expression of gratitude, and then you provide people with an opportunity to increase their involvement with the organization, you will have tremendous conversions. Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers here today, but I know the marketing team and the field operations team at Team Rubicon has done a tremendous job also increasing the number of volunteers by the tens of thousands. And that, again, is done with the same type of tactics, which is to express gratitude and to encourage more participation. So what are we looking at here? This is that data part that I was talking about. I'm, incredibly proud to be presenting this here. This is actually powered by Palantir, which is a technology partner of Team Rubicon's, and something that I wanted to also mention. Megan warned me a few times about calling attention to the incredible support that Twilio has provided, and that's not really why I'm here, but I think it highlights the need for an organization of any size to really kind of pick technology partners that are going to be there to help you scale. And there are so many. There's everybody from Salesforce to Palantir to Twilio to many more that I'm leaving out. But what was really cool is, we answered this call essentially for true transparency and impact reporting. And I mentioned already the power of the individual stories and the use of blogs or video to share narrative. But also what's really important is to show the bigger picture, right? And that comes through data transparency. And so what you're looking at here is incredibly outdated, which is to say I pulled it a couple of days ago. And this shows, both the total amount of money that's been raised, but more importantly, how many humans and animals were rescued during the first few days of the operation, how many volunteers are actually there, and how many homeowners have been, or I shouldn't say homeowners, but residents have been impacted. And what's really exciting about this is it shows kind of the bigger picture, and it kind of lets people know, hey, we're paying attention to your investment, and we take reporting that investment back to you very seriously. So overall, I want to talk about the kind of I apologize, someone walked into my office, they didn't know I was presenting, so it really threw me off there. The recap here is, it's really important to have a time-based campaign with a strong theme. Whether you're pre-planning that, or whether it's in response to a disaster, it's really important to think about how can I tie this theme back to the program. And again, to keep it really concise. It's better to hit people up with incredible frequency over a short period of time than it is to draw it out over a long period of time. The second thing is you've got people who are really fired up and passionate about your cause, whether it's a volunteer or just somebody who's been a beneficiary of your mission, of your programs. But these are people who are not professional fundraisers. So how do you leverage multiple channels in order to turn those people into professional fundraisers? You really want to think about, how do I customize that experience, meeting supporters on their preferred channel with their preferred content? For the data nerds out there, that means sharing that data dashboard. For the people who are, like myself, who still appreciate a handwritten card, that's that preferred channel. And finally, you want to really, this cannot be overstated, is the importance of converting new donors into lifetime supporters by quantifying that impact and expressing gratitude in a really sincere way. And I think those are the elements to a successful fundraising campaign, whether you're fortunate enough to have the time to plan it or whether you're in response to an urgent need. If you keep those four things in mind, I think you'll have a lot of success in your fundraising efforts.
All right. Matt, thank you so much for taking us through the journey. We've got some great questions coming into the chat window, and I'm going to start firing them off primarily towards you. If there are other folks who have questions, please do add them in, because we've got some time to get through some of these. So one of the questions that's actually been repeated a couple of times that I want to call out is, how are you collecting people's communication preferences? Or what are the mechanisms you're using in order to ensure that you can communicate with people on the right channel at the right time?
Yeah, very tactical question and a good one. How to do it is, in this case, we use form assembly, send it out via email or also through text, and ask people to fill out that form. And it always happens after the transaction, meaning after they create a fundraising page or after they donate. We try to break down that barrier for entry. And then we follow up with form assembly. Those key 3 questions then get pushed into the contact record inside Salesforce, which we are then able to draw from and push out the right content to the right people on the right platform.
That is great. And kind of following up on that, one of the examples you gave on that report impact was sending out the thank you card and SMS message as well. And there was a question on if you have any sense on whether either the thank you card that was sent out or the SMS text message that was sent out may have triggered additional gifts.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have it for this one because I haven't looked at the data, but in past campaigns, we saw that a person was 7 times more likely to give again in the same campaign period if personally thanked. And I apologize that I don't have the answer to that specific campaign. It was kind of something like going over to a fire hydrant that was broken and trying to take a sip of water the last few weeks. So I don't have that information for you, but I can tell you overall, we have seen people give again when personally thanked.
And that's great. Another question for you. One of the questions that came in is if you also send like an official tax receipt, or if the thanks text, or do you send a tax receipt in addition to for example, like the card and the SMS you sent?
Yeah, I am of the belief with all organizations that I work with that the tax receipt is an acknowledgement letter is very transactional, and that should be sent as a separate thing. In both examples, it was powered by Classy, peer-to-peer fundraising platform, and for those people who donated via Classy, a receipt was sent out, via email, and then for those 250 and above, there's also a physical acknowledgement letter, but it feels very form. It does reference the campaign, whether it be Hurricane Harvey or another campaign, and then in my gut, it's like, that's not an expression of gratitude. That's something that you're going to give to your accountant. So I like to isolate expressions of gratitude away from, a receipt.
Yeah, I think that is such a good point. I mean, I can recall when I was responsible for sending out donation receipts, and because I already had to do the print mailing for that I just thought that's where I'd throw in my thank you. But I think, with the different ways of connecting with people and really cost-affordable channels to be doing it on, there is a better time and a place for literally a receipt and an expression of gratitude. So I like how you've divided that out. So Matt, you've mentioned a few different technologies that you've used for different components. I believe you mentioned Salesforce as your CRM, Form Assembly as a way for collecting, for allowing your supporters to share information with you about how they want to be contacted. What's your technology approach to ensure that you've got the right back end and front end and communication systems in place overall to be able to really kind of manage these very personalized communications that you're doing?
Oh yeah, it's perfect all the time. Databases, no duplicates. It always works. Okay, my big picture on this topic of choosing a technology platform or technology platforms. First and foremost, I think one of the biggest mistakes in the nonprofit space is they implement technologies before they've sat down to develop a true strategy for that technology. They allow the technology platforms to dictate their strategy rather than choosing technologies that allow you to scale based on your strategic objectives, right? So that was a lot of like 50-cent MBA words. I think the approach to take is to sit down and think about, okay, what are we trying to achieve? In the case of Team Rubicon, it was, it's really effective when we hand wrote all these personal thank you cards, but how in the world are we going to do that with 20,000, 30, 40,000 supporters in a 2-week period? You just can't. So sitting down and thinking about, okay, which platform is going to allow us to house tens of thousands, which database will be our database of record, which database, and I'm biased, both at Team Rubicon as well as all of our clients at Cosmic primarily use Salesforce. And I like that because it's an open platform where you can work with best-in-class tools like Twilio for SMS, for example, or Classy for peer-to-peer fundraising, handwritten for handwritten thank you cards that aren't really handwritten. Those sort of things integrate with that platform. I like that it's open and that you can choose best-in-class partners. So I think overall it's about sitting down and really thinking about what is your technology strategy, how will technology allow you to scale personalized engagement to achieve your normal day-to-day operations in a much more robust and organized way. And then it's a matter of going out and shopping for those technology partners who are willing to really, to join you at 1 a.m. to build a Palantir-powered dashboard on the fly to report impact because you have this crazy idea that you want to do that. So I think, that's the approach to technology is to develop a plan and then implement, and then be willing to take risk and to try new things out. And so, yeah, I think that's a much better approach than just implementing and then kind of wondering, okay, now what? How do we use this?
I think that is a very smart approach. And an approach that wasn't really possible 15 years ago. We didn't have all of these platforms with open APIs that could communicate together, and now that is possible. Another question that just came in, which I'm curious about as well, is if you have you done any kind of your audience segmentation or analysis around any correlation between any of your supporters' age or demographics, and how that might correlate to specific channels or communication preferences?
Yeah, absolutely. This might surprise you, but speaking of this is a peer-to-peer fundraising conference. Peer-to-peer fundraisers, the ones who actually raise the most money tend to actually be the older demographic, the 55 plus, and absolutely the type of, that audience is on social media as well. But I think, common sense prevails a little bit there, but the important thing that you just brought out is are you measuring and are you adapting? So don't make some assumptions based on what you think is right, but then test those assumptions and adjust and fire. So yeah, I mean, overall, we used to think about it in terms of demographic based channels. So sending older people or major donors who tend to oftentimes be the same people. I should say more experienced people and major donors, sending them direct mail or a card, right? But now the way we think about it is the technology exists in a scalable way to individualize personalized communication via the right channel for the individual, for the content. So I'm kind of moving away from thinking about it in terms of major segments and instead be thinking about it on an individual basis.
I really like that, and I'm imagining you can do that more effectively so long as you have a really strong overarching theme. And again, the examples you use are so tangible. They're really excellent. One of the questions that came in is actually from Make-A-Wish, and they were talking about some of the services they provide or the wishes they provide come in at a fairly high price point, right? So if the tangible thing you have, like a wish per child, is like $10,000, how would you tie donation values so that they could align to something where the individual component is so high? Have you ever experimented with different pricing or donation levels that lead up to a really kind of big ticket item for funding a full wish?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in the case of Team Rubicon as well as Project Core, actually they're fortunate to have they can break down costs into little components, but I think that highlights the need to showcase the collective effort. So we've come up with a lot of, I remember for Tusk USA, for example, we were helping them develop a monthly giving program, and actually their concern was around how do we ask for unrestricted funding if we're saying $100 a month provides somebody on the ground making sure that anti-poaching is happening. And what we came up with for their theme was, we had that strong theme, game changers. So, they are, if you haven't figured it out, an anti-poaching organization in Africa. And so we came up with a strong theme of be a game changer, and a game changer, big game, cats and things like that. We thought through, how do we, build a monthly recurring giving program with a strong theme? And then that allowed us to essentially create giving levels that were tied to the theme rather to the dollar impact. And we have reinforced that with both data as well as narrative. So I think you still need to leverage narrative and data and to share and showcase, how does that connect to the overall theme? So in this case, if you've got a really expensive gift, one thing I would, one thing I would suggest kind of thinking through is there a theme that you can apply to that? Then can you have some giving levels? And I'm biased, but I say caution against the ones that everyone's already used, like the giving circle ones of this is the president's club and this is the, ambassador level. Unless you're,
but do you get to get on the plane first?
Right, exactly. Unless you're a maritime museum, I would say that doesn't sound very interesting to me. And so coming up with giving levels that are themed may be a way to kind of circumvent that.
That is great. One thing that we're just going to go for a couple more questions, but one thing that you've touched on repeatedly, and I just is this importance of timeline. You talked about running your peer-to-peer campaign with a high message frequency within a dedicated specific timeline. Are there any things, when you talk about empowering your supporters to be fundraisers, I think those of us have done this a few times, the timeliness of them asking their peers in their network and them being reminded to potentially it's not going to happen on the first ask, you might have to do it again. Do you have any best practices or anything that you've experimented with in the past on keeping things moving, keeping your fundraisers, the people who are fundraising on your behalf, moving on schedule and raising towards the cause, like on the timeline within that campaign window?
Yeah, I'll give away two of my favorite secrets. And one of them is, on a pre-planned time-based campaign, having a weekly coaching email, something that they can count on, really important. Weekly coaching emails, I think, is a great way to do it. The other one that I really think is fun that came, from example of the Hurricane Harvey is, Team Rubicon, like we always say, volunteers need to grab their go bag and they're going to get out there and they're going to start mucking out homes and get dirty. Well, what we tried actually was, I think at about 10:30 or 11 o'clock, we said, look, like our volunteers are grabbing their go bag, well, you're grabbing your brown bag. We've got a text for you to send to three people over your lunch break. So then we fired off that text to them. It gave them, a sense of urgency. We want you to take this action. It was totally tangible, right? It was like, look, I need you to do this, and this is doable. Like, send this to just 3 people. And so those are 2 tactics right there. We saw a really nice spike. We always see a spike, on weekly coaching emails for right around there. And then with the SMS, we saw a really nice spike during that lunch hour where donations were coming in. So those are kind of two tips that I can give away as teasers, I guess.
Those were great examples. Okay, last question for you. I know we've covered a lot of ground, and thank you so much for sharing your successes and some of the harder lessons learned on sending people multiple cards. But thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and expertise on this. For folks that may be newer to trying peer-to-peer or who might just want to be getting started for the first time, what would you suggest? Okay, you're looking at the rest of the calendar year, end of year fundraising's coming up, Giving Tuesday's coming up, there's all these things happening. What would you recommend be this kind of starting point? What's ground zero for somebody just getting ready to build out their peer-to-peer campaign for the remainder of the year?
Yeah, totally. It's not to say that there aren't successful year-end campaigns that involve peer-to-peer fundraising, but in my experience with the organizations I've worked with, they tend not to work that well. As well, say, as just, people who are giving at the year-end are often giving for tax purposes. So If you can identify a single holiday or a day, or just create a day that makes sense for your nonprofit that you can build a whole theme around, you know, and then you can build this time-based campaign. I think that would be my recommendation. So look for an opportunity in your development or marketing calendar where you're like, oh, right, like that specific day resonates with, you know, for example, we launched Game Changers on World Rhino Day. So picking a day like that where you can kind of rally behind and around, rather.
Yep.
The other thing I would say is, you know, think about it just like who in your network, if you're really just starting out, like, do you have board members, or do you have people who've been impacted by your program? Maybe you're like the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and there's an individual family who has seen and been part of and been a benefactor thereof their child receiving that wish. Can they create a fundraising page? So think about your core audiences and kind of do a soft launch and test messaging and ask for feedback and learn from them, and then incorporate that feedback into your broader campaign. I really recommend that because it allows you to do some real learning on the fly and kind of like we say at Team Rubicon a lot, adjust and fire based on that feedback.
I love the idea of creating your own day and just having that directly tied into the theme and the impact. I think that's very, very another good closing words of wisdom. All right, I believe we're coming up towards the end of the hour. Matt, thank you very much, and everybody on the call, thank you so much. You all stayed on the call and the webinar longer than I've seen in the past, so thank you for staying so engaged and all of the great questions that you all had. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Peer-to-Peer World Conference. And if you have any questions, additional questions or follow-ups for either myself and Matt, you can see our contact information is right there on the GoToWebinar screen. And we look forward to working with you in the future.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody, for attending, and thank you so much, Megan and Matt, for a really informative session. Hell, I learned a ton. Hope everybody else did as well. And if you're going to be joining us for the last session of the day, it's going to be coming up at the top of the hour. We're going to be closing down this session in a second, but look forward to seeing you at the top of the hour for